This is the 21.5 Show.
You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
Whether you're a professional pilot or want to be one, you're in the right place.
Let's get started.
Join professional aviators Dylan and Max as they talk their experience in the airlines, business aviation, and more.
Life is good.
Industry experts, unique stories, and plenty of fun. This is the 21.5 Show.
Here we go.
Max, we are so excited to be joined by our friends, Jim Lara, founder and principal of Greystone Advisors, and Jenny Showalter, Chief Motivational Officer, Showalter Business Aviation Career Coaching. We've been having some conversations on the NBAA channels, Jim and Jenny, about leadership in business aviation, and this topic keeps coming up. Max and I just chatted with Dr. Chris Broyhill a couple episodes ago, and normally we talk about compensation and the numbers, but we started to explore, well, is there a value to leadership? And would I go work for somebody or a flight department with a strong leader, but maybe not get as much money? And what are the intangibles there? And so we really want to explore more of the leadership topic, especially in business aviation. So to both of you, welcome to the program. Jim, I want to start with you. You were recently attended base. It sounded like there were some leadership topics explored there. What have you seen in business aviation when it comes to leadership?
We need a lot of improvement. And I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that the baton is being, and maybe almost has already been passed from the traditional reporting executive level. Those folks are nearing retirement. And the baton is being passed to a new generation of aviation reporting executives in the companies, and they have a different expectation. They have an expectation that the aviation department leader will function at the same level of performance that all their other direct reports do in the host corporation. And we're not doing well there, because I think we have put an incredible amount of emphasis on developing folks on the technical track, but not putting that same emphasis on the business track or on the track that the host organization follows, how it makes its money. And so the chance for aviation to become a strategic partner for the host organization is slipping. And it's slipping. The expectations now at the reporting executive area are coming down. And aviation is, in some organizations, is being reduced to a point-to-point transportation. And then that makes us vulnerable, because we now become a commodity. And the fractional programs and the charter programs, and to some extent the airlines, there's no differentiator when that happens. And so now it becomes a matter of cost. And the value, the true value of business aviation to the host organization is lost, because it's never been defined properly in the new reporting structures. And it's a lot like it's a lot like the iPhone. You remember? We're all of an age where we can remember when Steve Jobs was on stage and he held up the iPhone, and everybody said, "Nah, we don't need that. Nobody was going to buy that. That's crazy." But he defined value add, and we need to get on with it, and in business aviation and private aviation, private corporation, and private individual organizations, because the value add is there, but it has to be defined and it has to be promoted by the leaders in the aviation organization. And I'm coming to the conclusion that they just don't know how. and that's a problem for us. We need to grow everybody in aviation. And we had a great session at base on this. But it's a 1 hour session in a 365-day year. We need to put a lot more emphasis on growing the leadership talent. And one other point that was made, and I've made this to NBAA, but I'm not sure we've gotten resonance on it yet. I've suggested that leadership be defined as a precise career track, just like becoming an aviation director or becoming a chief pilot or becoming a director of maintenance. Having leadership defined as a specific career goal, I think would be helpful. But we're not there yet.
Well, and I think a big part in business aviation too is awareness of the fact that I think, to your point, a lot of the expectations that it's simply just point A to point B transportation problem that you're fixing, but it's more than that, because that's what, like you said, that there's other people that do that. Say, hey, how you doing? Yep, get on. We'll be there in an hour. And that's it. Whereas to add the value to having your own flight department requires a lot more than that. A lot more effort, a lot more knowledge. It's more of a concierge type situation where it's not just taking off and landing. There's a lot more that goes to that, and connecting the dots between, how we're getting to the airport, how we're getting to where we're going, making, solving problems as far as, hey, I need to go here. Here's what I need to do. How's the best way to do this? With the assets that we have available, and things like that make it a lot more than calling dispatch of some company and saying, hey, I need to go to, from Scottsdale to Van Nuys. Whereas maybe Hawthorne is a better option, and here's why we can, or just things like that. So I think you bring a good point up. But I'm not sure a lot of people understand that that's part of the job.
Yeah. And it gets down to, Max, a very basic thing. And that is that every organization should be defining what their value proposition is to the host organization. And every time it's different. So for instance, one client out west has a lot of manufacturing in China, but they want their execs in the home office. So the value proposition for the aviation department, one of the key ones, is to China and back in 30 hours. So that the execs can be on the ground in China, do what they need to do, but get back to corporate headquarters to do what they need to do in corporate headquarters. And until the aviation department really understood that, they were wearing all the pilots out. Pilots were black rings around their eyes and so forth. They thought that the corporation was just flogging them. But no, the value proposition was using the airplanes as a hotel. And then once you understand that, you can define a crewing model and a service model that responds to the value proposition. But you got to start with the value proposition. Why do you exist?
Yeah. And that value proposition can be wildly different than something like that with what's more of like a technical mission that you're, that you're trying to fill. I had a job where our primary mission was to have a good time, and he had the airplane to travel and for fun. And so I did my best to help facilitate that mission, which was having fun.
You were really out of your comfort zone on that one, Max. You really had to stretch yourself.
And that's my point too, is that sometimes, depending on the mission, you have to have the personality to suit that.
Exactly.
Like so it just depends on, and that's part of knowing what the good fit is and being able to fulfill that role. So it takes the right person, but also you have to know, you have to go in there with the mindset of, I'm trying to provide more than just transportation. We have to find solutions to problems to help show the value of what we're doing here. And at the end of the day, you're validating the cost, right? Because like we've always said, the biggest threat to any corporate flight department is the cost. But it becomes less of a cost the more value you add compared to, other options.
That's the offset. That's the offset of the cost. Is the
Right.
value proposition.
Right.
And the other thing, Max, that we discovered it is that folks in the aviation department, when they're dealing with this cost question, they get in this trap of, well, let's do it based on how much these guys make or gals make, and they do do the math that way. Well, that's completely wrong, because what executive or what company or what organization hires a high-powered executive to break even? None. Nobody. If you're breaking even, you're fired. Absolutely gone. Your value to the host organization as a senior executive is probably at least 100 times what your total comp is. At least 100 times. Now, you take that number and divide it by 3,000, which is the number of hours that most execs work, not 2,080, 3,000. Now you got a big number. And the cost of the airplane, the fully loaded cost of the airplane, is de minimis compared to the value that executive is charged with producing for the organization. Because no corporation hires a high-powered person to break even. That's completely crazy.
So, Jenny, I got a question for you. Jim's made some good points about how the employer, the principal, or the reporting executive is looking for a leader. You work with clients looking for jobs, kind of the other side of the coin. Are pilots talking about wanting to be a leader? Are they looking for leadership roles? What do you see on the other side?
So I'd like to answer that in a second, but I do want to respond to the initial conversation first and just say that it's become really clear to me. I've spent the last really 4.5 years now, since the beginning of the pandemic, focused on outplacement largely. And that's what my business was born out of, were the outplacement concepts, helping people who have lost jobs, and specifically people in the business aviation industry. And this past year, I've helped groups from the size of 36 individuals who have faced a flight department closure, all the way down to one individual who has faced that as well, and a little bit of everything in between. And what I can tell you, and what I want the viewers or the listeners to hear, is that if you think your flight department is safe, if you think you have a great relationship with the principal, the company, the leaders, whoever it is, think twice. Think twice, because there are threats to your flight department that exist, and they will find a way into your organization without you knowing it, and they will shut you down. And I have the privilege, I say, of helping people through the outplacement process. It is a privilege for me. It's a very emotional, very vulnerable time for people when they lose a job unexpectedly, especially in a time when hiring is not strong, when the economy is not great, when there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. It's really, really challenging to be looking for a job in moments like that, but it's a privilege to help them. But I deal with the human toll. I deal with the human collateral from these flight department closures. So if you're a leader and if you're listening, or if you want to be a leader and you're listening, don't get complacent, don't get comfortable, because they will come for you. and I'm not saying it based on one or two examples. I'm saying it based on many, many examples, and a growing list of examples of this actually happening in our industry. So I'm far from a conspiracy theorist. I'm very much a realist, and an optimistic realist at that. But this is something that I see and that we are experiencing. So I just want to be really clear with that. And then to the other point, are there people that want to be leaders? There are some that want to be leaders. There are some that want growth. There are some that want development. There are some that have their sights set on that. And then there are some that just don't want that. And as Jim and I have talked about in other webinars and media that we've done together, not everybody is cut out to be a leader. Not everybody is born to be a leader or has developed the skills along the way to be a great or effective leader. And especially in our smaller flight departments, we've got this history of just tapping the next most senior person, typically a pilot, to be that leader. And it worked for us for a while, but it's not working for us anymore. So I definitely think that if somebody out there wants to be a leader, there is a path, there is a need, but it's not something that anymore you can just be the next person in line and be made a leader and be successful. You have to do some development along the way.
You
Yeah.
got to have that. You got to have the aspiration for leadership. If you don't have it, when Jenny and I have talked about this 100 times, I can't tell you the number of chief pilots and to some extent aviation directors who are miserable in their role. And I've asked them. I said, "Well, why did you take the role?" And they said, "Well, really two reasons: money and title." And so I said, "Okay, great. How's that working for you?" Well, not very well, because they didn't have the aspiration for leadership. Yeah, but we've got to develop that, or the commodity folks will fill the void. We got to remember that the folks that are in the fractional programs and the charter programs, it is their job to create sales. It's their job. So, I mean, they're not nefarious. I mean, they're not out there saying, "Oh, I'm going to go close down 6 flight departments." No, and boy, it's really going to feel good when I close those down. No, that's not how they work. They have a sales goal, and it's part of their job. So we got to recognize that and create far more value than any cost savings that could be achieved.
Yeah, I think you hit an important point, though, that you have to actually have the desire for leadership. And there's a lot of pilots that are very happy just flying the jet and not having to worry about stuff.
Exactly.
I mean, there's a lot of people like that at the airlines too. I mean, there's something, and that's okay.
It's
Like,
okay.
people have to know that that's okay, and to
Yeah.
embrace that, relatively low stress lifestyle of not having to worry about, all the cogs in the machine. You just got to fly the machine. And so yeah, I think people have to be, one, honest with themselves about what their goals are too, but then two, I think some people are certainly born as better leaders than others. But there's leadership in everybody, and some people I think it takes a little more coaxing out of, and that's where some professional development could be very useful. But there's also been some great leaders in flight departments that had no training, and they just kind of had what it took, and it just works out. I don't know, if that's the majority even, or what, but certainly, there has to be some sort of path to successful leadership in a flight department, because, to your credit, Jenny, I mean, there's always a threat to a flight department. It is certainly most times a want, not that's what a Gulfstream salesman told me one time. We're in the business of want, not need. And I thought that kind of summed it up pretty well. And a lot of times the threat is the cost, but also there's other things too. I've heard of people shutting down flight departments just because it became a pain because it wasn't managed properly and they didn't want to deal with it.
Yeah, the threats can be internal and external. So I didn't say that before, but it's absolutely true. You can create your own threat.
Yeah, exactly. And people it's easy to forget when we've been through the time we have in the last couple years. And people, especially in smaller flight departments with more, one owner kind of deal, and they after a few years they get pretty comfortable and start to think they're part of the family and the whole thing, and then they're really shocked when they get cut loose. And I've always said that to people too. I've seen, I'm like, listen, it's great to have a good relationship with the owner, but don't ever forget where you sit here in the organization. Okay.
Right.
Amen. You are not indispensable.
You're not indispensable.
You are not. You can save them money. You can bend rules. You can, bend over backwards 5 times. You can do all of these things, and you are not indispensable.
Well, which is important to remember too. There's people that feel this, sometimes this undying loyalty too, where they don't want to leave because they don't want to hurt people's feelings, even though it's in their best interest personally. And I've also said that to people. I mean, that is funny, because I had a really good relationship with the last Part 91 operator. I left to go to the airlines. Like we were like good friends. And one of his favorite sayings he would say to people is, "Everybody's replaceable," right? And I quit, and he was upset and trying to offer me a bunch of money. I'm like, "Look, Ron, everybody's replaceable, man. Like you'll figure it out. Everyone's going to be okay here. I mean,
It's so true. I mean, everybody is. And I think, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and I just did a post about loyalty. And, we used to see people retiring from positions that had been there 20, 30 years, or maybe just one job on their resume. And that's not how the world works anymore. And that's not how it works from employer to employee and from employee to employer. And so as I'm writing resumes for clients, as I'm talking with them through challenges and opportunities in their career, movement is something that we see much more now than we used to. So that loyalty piece, I'm still a big loyalty person and a fan of loyalty, but it is diminished some. You don't see that as much because I think many of us do recognize that we're all replaceable.
All right. Coming back to the leadership thing for just a second, one of the things we can't forget is that if you are the leader of the flight department, that your responsibility to lead is not just the flight department. You have a responsibility to lead the person that you're reporting to or the corporation. You have to lead up as well as lead the organization that you're responsible for. So that means that you have to know a lot about what that host organization does and how aviation can help that host organization be more effective. And then you have to be able to articulate that and continually sell that, because here's a guy that I bet most of you you all are so much younger than I am, but he was big in the airline business, and his name was Frank Borman, and the the airline was Eastern Airlines, and in the commercial it said we earn our wings every day, and that's still true today for us.
Yeah, it's there. I've said this to Dylan before too. I'm like, there's an art to tooting your own horn in a flight department, because there's a lot of things that go on that people will never see if you don't make it visible. But there's certainly an art in doing it so you don't sound like a jerk.
Look what I just did.
And
it's a fine line, though. It's a very fine line sometimes.
It is. It really is. I did it a lot in a flight department I ran, and there's a yeah. It's a way to do it. It is an art. It's a tiptoeing thing along this line of, but you have to prove your value, because, like you said, the threat of the cost outweighing the benefit is always there, and you have to continually be a steward for the benefit of what you're doing here. And how, wins you're doing and efficiency. And sometimes, if you go and fly out to a maintenance facility that's doing a big inspection and you provide proper oversight and ask some questions and save tens of thousands of dollars, like, that's something that should be known.
Sure.
But you don't, pound your chest and say, I saved the day. There's a way to do that. And so
that's in our premium content. For subscribers only.
That's how we call it threading the needle.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, we Jenny, you talked about working with folks with flight department closures. I would say in general, the industry for probably the last 15, 20 years has been trending away from the big corporate flight department and to more high net worth individual operators. Right. In the last episode, Dr. Chris Broyhill said, high net worth individuals buy big airplanes, and then they say, I want a pilot right now. Go get me one. I don't care what the cost is, because I'm only going to pay a couple of them. I'm not paying 20 of them. So get me somebody that's typed and current and ready to go now. And so people are being lured away from these larger flight departments into these smaller flight departments. Max and I, for many years, have been in the very typical one airplane, two pilot type operations. So that's where I want to focus for a little bit, because I think it's less obvious about leadership there when it's just two people. And maybe there's one lead pilot or chief pilot, or it's very clear, and sometimes it maybe isn't. So I want to start, Jim, with the question, if there's two pilots, do we really need a leader?
Yeah, my response would be you both have to be leaders. And it needs to be a very collaborative relationship. It cannot be a command and control relationship. You two have got to work together, and it's got to be very, very symbiotic, because you're going to work together for the success of your operation. Even if it's two people and one aircraft, it's even it's even harder because you're the sole focus of that host organization. You're on all the time. So I think both pilots need to be leaders. It has to be a collaborative arrangement. You got to like one another. You got to be friends, and you got to have a commitment to work together and have each other's back. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I think that's very true because you can't just be a show up and fly the jet guy in a 2-pilot operation. Like there's enough stuff to do where some of that has to be divvied out. But also at the end of the day, there's usually one person who's the liaison between the decision maker and the owner and the quote unquote flight department of 2, right? But that person, in speaking to the owner, has to have some of the uncomfortable conversations of budget things, pay, vacation. And we've seen a lot of times people that are, owner pleasers, and they're looking to never want to upset the owner in the short term. Don't want to say, oh, this pilot, I need, we're going to have to pay a contract pilot because our other pilot needs to go on vacation. And they'll say, oh, tell the pilot, oh yeah, you can go on vacation. And then all of a sudden a trip pops up, then he didn't, convey that and have that uncomfortable situation, tell the owner it's going to cost him some money because, pilots have to have a life too. And then says, oh, well, can you move your vacation? And just trying to be this pleaser to everybody without having to actually, have a conversation with anybody. And those are the people that don't stick up for the people they're representing in that communication that can kill a flight department, kill a relationship. That's why people leave. I've seen it a million times. And a lot of times that's not really what the owner of the aircraft wants. Like a lot of times if you have the conversation, they're okay with that. They get it, but people are too afraid or don't have the gall to go up and just and have that talk. And then it makes everybody upset and people leave. And then that's a worse outcome in the end. Then you're paying for a type rating or whatever. And it's just silly. But we've seen that so much because especially in our market, it's a very heavy, 1 or 2 pilots, 1 airplane, situation here in Scottsdale. It just always has been like that. It's not, Teterboro where there's big, it's just not. And I've seen this time and time again where people are not effectively managing the really not that much to manage, but maybe that's the problem, is because you don't have to have those discussions that often. And so they just try and avoid it, and it never works out. And that's my biggest gripe with this whole situation. I've just seen it so many times where I'm just like, and they think, or they're being cheap about certain things and think they're saving the owner money, but in the long run, it's very clear it's not effective.
Right.
And oftentimes costs more money, and it's not a good thing.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I will, I don't have a habit of disagreeing with Jim, but I do agree that there has to be somebody who is a leader. I think in a 2-pilot situation, you both have to be leaders, but as you were saying, Max, somebody's got to be the liaison with the high net worth individual. They are a unique bunch, and I think we can all agree to that. And they all have their different issues, and they're not always the greatest communicators. And getting their attention, making sure that you're meeting their expectations. Sometimes it's just catching them in the back of the airplane because that's where they're captive. It's a real challenge. And so to have somebody who is point at that, and then the ultimate financial decision making, I think is really, really key. I've seen it happen a bunch of times where, nobody knows who's in charge, or somebody is overly in charge. And like Max said, trying to save a lot of money, making decisions, which ultimately in the long run don't do anything except for set the next person up for failure who comes in as the leader. And that's something I've worked with too, is somebody who's come in and followed a leader who was one of the types to bend over backwards for the owners. And you've set the next person up for failure because you've trained those owners to anticipate that you're going to say yes to whatever it is they ask, or nobody's going to go on vacation. It's always going to be their 2 pilots that they're used to seeing, or whatever the situation may be. And so I think it's really important that somebody shows that strong leadership potential within that type of a department.
Yeah, Dylan and I have talked about this too, about somebody ruining a potentially really good job by setting an unrealistic precedent.
Exactly.
It's the old mindset of the only thing you can do is just save money. That's it. That's the only value you can bring in. So the only time you can talk to the owner is great news. I saved us, X, and that's the only
And
value you can convey.
this is a really expensive business we're in.
Yeah.
I mean, if people get into this business
Yeah.
just thinking all they're going to do is save money, they're in the wrong business, because it costs a lot of money to do what we do.
Exactly. We've coached folks in the past when they look at, I think it's more and more I've realized people say, oh, should I go work for this person or should I go work for this operation? The end of the day, the question is, how much juice do you or the lead pilot have with the owner? That's almost the most important thing to me now, because if you're both just kind of along for the ride, then it's not going to be a good time, because there will be difficult conversations. There's heavy inspections on airplanes every 4 years, so it's going to come up.
Indeed.
Yeah. And what a friend of ours that I saw yesterday in training happened. He heard us talk a little bit about leadership in our last podcast, and he brought it up to me, yesterday. And he says, one of the big things for leadership too is you have to be empowered by the person writing the checks to be the leader, and that's a big problem too. Where a lot of times, if they're stepping over going over your head with things, and then you're not empowered to, and then you really can't do anything because you're not effective. And that's a big piece of it too, that I think some people miss. And a lot of times, I've had to have that talk too, because sometimes owners don't realize that they're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to say, hey, listen, when you do this, it makes me not able to do my job because of this. And I've had to do that a bunch of times. And a lot of times they're like, oh yeah, I didn't even think about that. Okay. You handle it from now on. I'll direct.
You're hired as the subject matter expert. They should let you be that.
Yeah.
This is what, and I've said too, these are things you pay me to deal with. So you don't have to deal with this. It doesn't make sense.
Have you dealt with that, Jim?
That's all part of managing up. It's all part of managing up. And you should not wait for a crisis to have that conversation with your reporting executive or high net worth individual. That's something that is a continuing discussion. Here's how it's going. Here's the challenges that we're likely to come up against. If you have somebody bypassing me and going to you directly, please turn them around. Let me do my job. And the more that you have those conversations with your reporting executive or high net worth individual, the more trust that you're going to engender with that individual. Because if dealing with the flight department becomes, quote, I hate the drama, but I love the product, then you're at risk. But if you work with your reporting executive to let them know what's going on and really build their trust in you, then you're going to have more and more empowerment, more and more license. If you only are talking with them when there's an issue or a problem, then you will be perceived as the problem.
That's a good point.
That's well said. Let's take a time out from our conversation to talk about another friend of ours, Timothy P. Pope, who's a certified financial planner dedicated to guiding professional pilots through smart financial planning. Whether it's saving for retirement, investment management, a seamless military transition, or strategic tax planning, Tim is your trusted financial partner. Join Tim as he leads engaging discussions on personal finance strategies for professional pilots on the Pilot Money podcast. Timothy P. Pope, helping professional pilots make the most out of life. One other thing I wanted to look at in the small flight department lens, Max and I both fly with really capable pilots that are not in the lead position, but will be someday. And as a leader of our small flight departments, we want to make sure that they're ready. How can we help to develop them? And it's tough because maybe we still have to be the primary point of contact with the high net worth individual, but we do want to be cultivating the next generation of leaders. So, Jenny, do you have any thoughts on what we can do with the folks that we work with to get them ready?
Yeah. So first of all, I congratulate you on looking at the future and wanting to develop those other pilots that are with you. So I think that's really wonderful. You are in the minority, though, I would say. That is not what I typically see, especially in a small flight department. somebody has typically risen to the top as the leader of the two, and the other one gets to file the flight plans, or do odd jobs, book the rental cars, book the hotel rooms, and doesn't necessarily get the development that they deserve and in many cases want, because the other pilot wants to be that indispensable person to the owners. It's job security, and I don't fault them. And I think a lot of times it's subconscious, but I would tell, if you're a leader in your small flight department, if just got one other pilot that works with you, really listen, really have a conversation with them and say, what is your end game? What is your goal in all of this? What do you want to do? And what can I do to help you? And whether it's sending them to a conference or a convention, whether it's letting them get their cam. I mean, all in all, a relatively small cost, but the goodwill that you've given that person along the way when you support them in that is fantastic. So maybe it's letting them sit in a meeting. Maybe it's giving them an additional responsibility. Loosen your grip a little bit and give them a little bit more. And I go back to the loyalty piece. That's how you build loyalty. That's how you build retention, is by making somebody feel like they have a stake in the game. And so I think it's just invaluable to communicate, have those conversations, and really know what the person who's sitting in the seat next to you wants to do.
Yeah, and I remember sitting from the outside in a job that Dylan had a long time ago with a guy that used to hoard all the cheese, and keep it real close, and didn't want, and we would just laugh. We're like, this is so ridiculous. But the thing about it is that a lot of times those are the people that don't have the self-confidence in their worth, right? So they feel everything's a threat, and someone's gonna, if I let this guy file the flight plan, it's gonna,
Yeah.
it's so silly. And so yeah, I think you have to give people responsibility, and it makes your life easier too. Like, you don't have to do everything all the time, and it's always good too. The best thing too, and to a two-person flight operation, is to have two sets of eyes, like, all the time with customs paperwork and all of that stuff. That should be a collaborative thing. Like, there's only one person that could type in the passport number and fill out the paper or whatever you're doing. But that's all should be a very collaborative effort. And that's how people learn, is by doing and also by screwing stuff up. So when you go to review it together, say, oh, this is actually, we need to do it this way, blah, blah. And that's how people learn. And it's, you gotta let loose of the reins. And there's people that listening to this, who you are, that are cheese hoarders of the flight department. Let loose a little bit. Have a little confidence in yourself, or make yourself, if you're worried about that you're not valuable enough that you have to do everything, you need to find other ways to make yourself more valuable, because who files the flight plan and makes the hotel reservations is not a true example of value. So
let's say that it's just a two-person flight department, and you're the senior person, and you've got somebody who really has shown you a lot of potential, and you think that they have a good leadership opportunity or potential. So the first thing you got to do is to find out if they think they've got a good leadership potential, because you can't make anybody a leader. Someone's got to want to be that, want to grow into that. And then, as you've said, okay, so what do you want to be? What, do you want to be a chief pilot? Do you want to be a director of aviation? Do you want to be a senior captain? What do you want to be? And whatever it is that they want to be, there's a laundry list of skills and experiences that they've got to achieve. They've got to do. They got to check all these boxes before they're ready. Then that becomes the basis of a development plan, where you can say, okay, here's how we're going to accomplish this, and here's how we're going to accomplish the next thing, and so forth. And that's critically important to our younger folks that are coming into the workforce today. They want to see what their growth plan is, and they don't have enough experience yet to develop the growth plan. You got to help them, and then you got to open the doors to let those experiences happen. But I've seen the cheese hoarders as well, and they all don't live in Wisconsin. They're all over. But if you really want to develop folks, you can do it that way and help them with the experiences that they need to have. before they take on that role. And just one more comment on experience, if you allow. My definition of experience, that's what you get just after you needed it. So if you can get these experiences as you're growing up where they're not going to be lethal mistakes, that's that's going to help them as well.
Yeah. A lot of it's just figuring it out as you go along.
Yeah.
It's funny too, the more we talk about this and stuff, I'm thinking about like there's a lot of airline pilots that are listening to this that are probably like, this sounds exhausting. Like, who wants to deal with all of this? And which is true. And so my point being is that there's a lot of pilots like that, where the airline is the ultimate good fit for the show up and fly pilot, because literally everything's done with you. But you can get that too in a larger, once you get a critical mass in a business aviation flight department where you have a scheduler and dispatchers, and you get close to that where you get the paperwork sent to you. You show up, you kick the tires and light the fires and go. But there are people, like even at the airlines too, I don't want people to misunderstand that if you have a leadership desire and things, that takes the form of being a check airman or getting involved with the union or getting involved in, there's a ton of outside jobs. So people that maybe haven't flown at the airlines and thinking about that, but have that leadership drive, I don't want them to think that this is the only avenue for it. I mean, there's a lot of that in the airlines, and I fly with a whole bunch of different people that are very happy flying their line. They don't pick up any open time. They don't apply for any other jobs. They show up and they go home. And that is a great life. Like, it really is. Like, you have to sometimes have responsibility and things to appreciate the value in that. But there's other people like I used to think I wanted to be that guy, and I just can't be that guy. It turns out, like, because I have a lot of other stuff, like a lot of other hobbies, I have no problem filling my free time. And so I think in my head, I want to be that guy to just be uninvolved and show up and fly. Because I do love to just fly and go home and not deal with the rest. But I also continue to get myself wrapped up in these leadership roles, seemingly like I can't help it. And so sometimes you have to also be honest with yourself and be like, okay, well, this is,
but it's fulfilling. That's the thing. I mean, it's funny because we've been talking and we make it sound so negative and like, oh, this, and you got to deal with it. But at the end of the day, you want fulfillment in your career.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's what folks who maybe are just punching the time clock, flying an airplane, they find out there's probably more to it. And then you can get that fulfillment you don't have to do it in aviation.
That's the difference. That's the difference between each person.
Exactly.
Some people, that is very fulfilling.
Yes.
They are super happy doing that.
Yep.
And some people are not.
Yeah.
And but that is also the beauty of aviation, where it's like, if you're a mid-level manager at a company, like working in an office and you are in charge of people, like you don't have the option to scale back to just like, without some sort of massive pay cut or whatever. Like you just don't have that flexibility, where in aviation you do, even airlines or business aviation or whatever. Like you can scale the leadership and responsibility aspect of your job, a lot. I mean, quite a bit.
Coming back to the two-person flight department, one of the things that we didn't make mention of yet is that no matter what the size of the flight department is, if it's one airplane or 20, there are 5 essential functions that have to be taken care of in every one of those organizations. You got flight ops, you got maintenance, you got scheduling and dispatch, you've got the executive office interface or the owner interface, and you've got business administration, paying all the bills and planning and so forth. You got all 5 of those things, whether it's one aircraft or 20. So if it's only 2 of us in the organization, how are we going to get all those things done? Because you can't let any one of those things drop. And that means reaching out to the organization, and maybe you get some help in the host organization itself. But whether it's everybody's got to realize there's 5 essential functions that have got to get done every single day. And you got to work that out.
Here's the real question, Jim. hold those 5 fingers up. How many of those are you formally trained when you go to pilot school? Maybe one or two. Yeah.
What one? Yeah.
So it's on you to develop a lot of those other areas.
It's on you, or hopefully you fell into a situation with a good mentor that has stepped on his toes enough times and figured it out. So you don't have to step on.
That's why my plastic surgeon has given up on my nose, because it's been broken about 18 times.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot, Jim, because I love asking you this question, and you always have a great answer. We'll tie up the 2 pilot, 1 airplane department with this. We're coming to the end of the year. Let's say that you're the lead pilot on this airplane, and you go, man, maybe I do need to implement a few things. I need to do some leadership. Let's start by having an end of the year meeting. What would be a good way for me as the lead pilot to have an end of the year meeting, which is me and the other pilot? That's it. Maybe what are 2 or 3 things I could write down, make an agenda, and what would be productive for us to look at?
Well, that's the first thing, is never have a meeting without an agenda. And you distribute that agenda not during the meeting. You distribute it a couple, 3 days beforehand to give that other person a chance to think about it. And then the next thing that I do is I ask the other person, what do you think we ought to be focused on in the coming year? What's your idea? What do you think we ought to be focused on? Because you want to involve somebody that way. And the other way that I don't do is, all right, Max, here's the 7 things that I think we ought to be focused on the coming year. What do you think? And Max says, well, I don't agree with number 3 and number 5. And my response is, Max, I asked that question just to get you to agree. I really don't care that you don't agree. I just want you to agree. That's not the way you're gonna elicit buy-in. We got to remember this very important thing, that in the civil world, and I'm talking about the non-military world, in the civil world, followership is optional. Everybody chooses who they're going to follow. You can't command followership. You got to earn followership. And so the first tactic is set the agenda far in advance, give that other person a chance to think about it, knowing that what they bring to the table is going to be carefully considered and accepted. And then act on what you hear. The 2 most powerful tools that God gave us is these 2 ears. And then you're going to develop a plan that you can take forward to your reporting executive, and know that you and your flying partner are committed to this. And you come in with a tone of a positive tone and a forward-leaning tone. And here's how we're going to get it done tone. A lot of people.
But I would
Go ahead, Jim.
Sorry, Jim. I would say the first step in all of this, in my opinion, is to actually have a meeting, because I can't tell you how many, especially small flight departments, some larger, you'd be surprised, don't actually even have the meeting. Or it's a conversation in the cockpit, crossing the Atlantic, or a conversation over dinner while you're on the road, or something informal. I think you have to have the conversation, and you need to give it the time and the space that it deserves. It needs to be separate from any other duty that you're doing. It needs to be separate from a trip, and it needs to be intentional. And the message as a leader that you send to the people that you work with when you have these meetings is, I care, I value your opinion if you follow Jim's method for having the meeting. So, but having the meeting, that's essential. So if you're not having one, get one on the books.
And I think that a lot of times you'll be very surprised if you ask the question about, what should our focus be next year? What are our goals? What can we do better? Things like that. I think you'd be surprised, because there's a lot of that you don't hear unless you ask the pointed question. And you might have no idea what are things you need to work on in the future, which it goes back to what we talked about in the beginning, which is, providing a service and filling a specific need that justifies your existence, essentially.
I've got one last thing that's really fun. This is just to mix it up and have a good time. I've been awarding the Pilot of the Year award at the meeting too, which is always to the other. So there's only one other pilot, and it's kind of a funny thing, but it is something. It is kind of cool. You can make. I have one buddy that does it that I stole it from, and they make a Christmas ornament with it every year. So it's hanging on his Christmas tree every year. So just something sort of kind of fun to
But
make.
that's team
Yeah.
building, Dylan. That's team building. And that's something else that gets really lost in a small flight department. I mean, when was the last time you invited your team, whether it's just another pilot or you've got maintenance or flight attendant or whoever, scheduler, dispatcher there? When was the last time you took your team and maybe even their partners or spouses out to dinner? I mean, when was the last time you did something like that to team build? So you actually, while it's really cute what you did, it's essential. That's another essential piece. So if you're not team building with your team, you might want to consider that as well.
Good point. Anything else on the small flight department topic before we tie this one up?
We touched on it just briefly earlier, but it's the budget. If you're charged with developing the budget for your small flight department, the two of you, don't start with the numbers. Start with the assumptions. The biggest assumption is, how many trips are we going to fly next year? What does that translate into hours? Because the lion's share of your budget is fixed. You can't do anything about it. The variable portion of your budget is your flight hours. So you got to argue and agree on with your principal what are the assumptions that we're going to put into this, and it includes temporary duty pay. For your contract folks, they're going to fill in for you when you're on vacation. Get all of that out of the way, but do it in a series of assumptions. We're going to do this, because the budget then becomes a math exercise. Agree on the assumptions with your reporting executive or principal. That is the key to hassle-free budgeting.
Yeah, and he brings up a really good point about building a budget in there, a contract pilot budget, which is because then it diffuses that conversation that everyone's afraid to have every time someone wants to take vacation. It's already in the budget. We already talked about this. It's already done. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Okay. Now, let's say I'm at a flight department, high net worth individual, maybe there is no budget. They don't want to see, they've never asked for budget. Am I shooting myself in the foot by being like, you know what? I could create a budget. I've got the template here from MBAA. I could do this whole thing. Good idea or bad idea to provide an unsolicited budget?
I don't know how to run my life without a plan. It's to me the corollary in aviation is, okay, let's file our flight plan. Okay, where are we going? No clue, but let's just go flying. I've got it. In my world, if you don't plan, you're planning to fail.
Well, I have a good answer to this one too, because I've had this situation before. I'm like, hey, I built a budget. You want to sit down? Couldn't be less interested in going over the budget. Couldn't care less. But the reason you still build the budget, so you still know, is because ultimately there will be interest in the budget. It's just not in a formal meeting setting. They'll be like, well, so what's this operation going to cost to run this year? Just in passing, right? Or something. How much is maintenance going to cost us this year? And that's why you build the budget. So that way, when that question is asked, that's part of your job as being a steward of the company or the owner's money, is you have to know where it's going and what pieces. And even if you say, oh yeah, it's $1.2 million a year, that's it. It's just $1.2 million. Like, you have to know the pieces of that puzzle. And while it is much easier to zero in if you have some active participation in figuring out, where we're going next year and how many hours we're going to fly and things like that. So you can project fuel and, pilot expenses and things like that. But realistically, those things are actually a pretty small chunk of the total budget. So you need to know, at least at a minimum, the fixed costs of where you're at for that year, because I've always said a good way, a good thought. The thing I am always thinking in the back of my mind when I'm managing a flight department is you want to always be able to say, I told you so. I told you about this. And even if they don't care at the time, you still need to be able to say, because it oftentimes they may not care then, and 6 months later, all of a sudden it's like number one on the priority list, Right. And so you have to say, look, we talked about this. I told you about this, whether it's, whatever it is. And so that's why you kind of have to be forward thinking. And even if it's not important at the time, a lot of those things will be important later on.
That's why that assumption list is so important, because you develop it in collaboration with your reporting executive or your high net worth.
And even if you don't have engagement from the reporting executive, if you've been there a little while, you can kind of make some pretty educated estimates on what the operation is going to look like.
You bet.
So just take it and run with it.
All right, guys, we're just about to hit time. We had another section on the larger flight department. I think we'll just do a part 2 of that maybe in the coming months, because this feels like a really good section just on the small flight departments, which I think it's really
As
perfect.
always, guys, I really appreciate the opportunity to interface with you guys. It's always wonderful to have these sharing of thoughts and keeps everything fresh. So thank you.
Yeah.
Agreed. You guys give an awesome service.
Well, we can't do it without people that actually know what they're talking about.
That's the great thing.
Thank you guys.
We just push record and bring in the experts. Well, if you think that your flight department could help from either Jim or Jenny, or maybe both of them, we'll have their contact information in the show notes. You can reach out and get some further expertise. We will have them back on the show. And I'm copywriting the Jim and Jenny show.
Yeah,
and that's gonna be a LinkedIn show. We're gonna produce that, and
wait till we come up with the jingle.
Yeah, it's gonna be incredible. Yeah,
be like a morning radio show.
Yeah, it's gonna be great.
It's the Jim and Jenny show.
That's right.
Hey, let's get something from Motown.
There you go.
Something catchy.
That's right. We will be back with you guys in the coming months. If you're a listener and you have a question for either Jim or Jenny, I'm pretty sure they're going to answer it. So write us in info@215podcast.com. We will pass it on, or you can connect with them on LinkedIn. And we
could actually call Jim and Jenny an esteemed diamond dog if somebody needs to elicit some advice. We can turn to them for their expertise.
That is right.
So
we'll be back with more of the 215 show next week. Until then, remember,
flexibility is the key to air power. We'll see you next time.
The statements made in this show are our own opinions and do not reflect, nor were they under any direction from any of our employees.